Welcome to Trending Unpacked, the show where we break down the stories everyone's talking about and explore why they matter. Today, we're journeying into a narrative that, well, it really seemed to grip everyone, didn't it? Stretching far beyond Australia, making headlines globally. It's a story that takes something so fundamental, so comforting, sharing a meal, and twists it into something, well, deeply chilling.
Yeah.
So, try to picture this scene. Leongatha. It's this quiet, small town in rural Victoria, Australia. Pretty idyllic, really. And you imagine a family getting together, maybe a Sunday lunch hosted at home. Supposed to be warm, familiar, just normal. But this lunch, this particular meal, it wasn't ordinary at all. What started seemingly as just another family gathering quickly, shockingly, spiraled into one of the most tragic and frankly sensationally followed crime stories of the year. That peaceful image, that sense of just everyday safety, it was completely shattered. And what's left behind is not just immense grief, but this maze of questions that are still echoing today.
It's really quite remarkable, isn't it, how fast this story transcended its local setting. Almost instantly, you felt it capture global attention, stopped feeling like just a regional news item, and became this sort of macabre, real-time mystery that everyone felt plugged into. The sheer unsettling strangeness of it all, an intimate family lunch, turning into this fatal event, it just immediately threw up these profound questions about trust. It really challenges our basic assumptions, doesn't it? About safety in our own homes, the food we share, the potential dangers hiding in plain sight, especially when food is prepared by someone familiar, someone you might even, love. The paradox there is just so stark, and I think it's exactly that unsettling flip, that inversion of the expected, that made the world lean in and really demand to know what happened.
That's a really key point. The idea that something so universal, so, I guess, foundational as sharing food could become the setting for such awful tragedy. It's just deeply disturbing. It forces you, doesn't it, to reevaluate what you think of as safe. And at the center of this story, the person right in the middle of it all, is an Australian woman named Erin Patterson. She was the host. It was her home in Leongatha where this fateful lunch took place. And well, as we now know, her role that day led to incredibly serious allegations that are still making headlines.
Yes, and understanding the legal side right from the start is crucial here. Erin Patterson was formally charged, this was late 2023, early 2024, after what sounds like a really extensive investigation. And we're not talking about minor charges. She's facing multiple counts of murder and also attempted murder. So these charges immediately signal the immense gravity of the situation. It explains why the case has stayed so firmly in the public eye under such intense scrutiny. It's this legal framework that shifts it from just a tragic event, however awful, into a major criminal investigation, a story that really needs careful handling as we look at the facts and, well, the public reaction around it.
Okay, let's really focus on the specifics of that lunch because it's the absolute pivot point, isn't it? Everything stems from that meal. It was a family gathering held at Erin Patterson's home. The main course, the centerpiece really, was reported to be beef Wellington. Now, beef Wellington, it's often seen as a special occasion dish, right? Something you make to impress, to celebrate, a bit of effort involved. But it was a key ingredient within this seemingly celebratory dish that's suspected of being the insidious cause of it all. We're talking, of course, about mushrooms. And these weren't just any mushrooms. They were later identified chillingly as death cap mushrooms. Mm-hmm. That name alone, death cap, does that contribute to the fascination beyond just how lethal they are?
Oh, absolutely. The name itself is incredibly evocative, isn't it? It plays a huge part in this sort of the dark allure surrounding this particular fungus. Death cap, it doesn't mince words. It's a stark warning. And it's not just for dramatic effect. It reflects a truly terrifying reality. Amanita phalloides, that's the scientific name, it's infamous for very specific biological reasons. These mushrooms are lethally toxic, and I mean lethally toxic, even in tiny amounts. Just eating a small piece, sometimes as little as half a cap, they say, can be enough to kill an adult. So getting slightly technical for a moment, they contain these really potent toxins called amatoxins. These are complex molecules, bicyclic peptides if you want the chemistry, and they basically go straight for a vital enzyme in our cells, RNA polymerase II. What that means in practice is they shut down protein synthesis. And the cells that rely heavily on this, like in your liver and your kidneys, they just start dying. But here's the really insidious part. It's not like a poison that hits you instantly with obvious symptoms. You might get severe stomach pains, vomiting, diarrhea, maybe 6 to 24 hours after eating them.
Awful, but perhaps seems like just bad food poisoning initially. But then often these symptoms actually subside. There's this deceptive phase, a sort of false recovery that can last for a couple of days. And all the while, during this quiet period, the amatoxins are just relentlessly doing their damage, causing irreversible harm to the liver and kidneys. By the time the full, devastating impacts becomes clear, often with jaundice, confusion, organ failure setting in, it's frequently too late or requires incredibly drastic measures like an emergency liver transplant. This delayed, silent attack pattern is exactly what makes death cap poisoning so hard to diagnose quickly and why the outcomes are so often catastrophic. And to make it worse, they often look quite similar to common edible mushrooms. They don't taste bad, apparently. No bitterness, no immediate warning signal on your tongue. Imagine that. The thing designed to kill you gives absolutely no sensory clue.
That is genuinely horrifying. The idea that something so deadly could look so ordinary, even taste okay. And the results, as you said, were just devastating. This wasn't one person getting sick. This meal had a catastrophic impact on multiple guests. 3 relatives died after eating that lunch, specifically Erin's in-laws, Gail and Don Patterson, and another relative, Heather Wilkinson. The fact that they were family just adds this incredibly tragic personal layer. It wasn't just loss of life, it was this deep tear within a family. But amidst all this tragedy, there was also a 4th guest, Ian Wilkinson, Heather's husband, and he survived remarkably, though only after being critically ill for a long time. The fact that one person survived while 3 didn't, well, that just adds another layer of mystery, doesn't it? It raises questions about, I suppose, who ate what, how much, individual reactions.
Oh, absolutely. When you see multiple deaths coming from one single intimate event like a family lunch, it just ramps up the eerie, somber feeling exponentially. It stops being just a statistic or a terrible accident and becomes this shattering of a family unit. Multiple lives gone, another hanging by a thread for weeks. The scale of the tragedy within such a personal context, it resonates deeply because it violates a core human expectation of safety. It triggers this almost primal fear, maybe of betrayal, maybe just of terrible random misfortune happening right within the circle where we expect the most safety, the most care. That aspect, the shared loss, the family connection, is definitely a huge reason why this story has carried such emotional weight and just stuck in people's minds for so long. It really forces you to confront how fragile those closest bonds can sometimes be.
And following such a devastating event, the investigation was, understandably, very thorough. It had to be, given the circumstances. The police carried out this meticulous, months-long inquiry after the incident. They were clearly digging into every detail, every possible lead. That long, careful process really signals the complexity and the seriousness of the case. It shows it wasn't being treated as just a straightforward, tragic accident by law enforcement. You can only imagine the forensic challenges, trying to identify toxins, maybe analyzing leftover food if there was any, figuring out who ate how much of which part of the dish, building that timeline of symptoms. It must have been incredibly complex. And then eventually, after all that work, the formal charges were laid against Erin Patterson. And as we mentioned, they were extremely serious murder and attempted murder. But, and this is absolutely vital to keep stating, she has pleaded not guilty to all these charges, which sets the stage for what will inevitably be a very closely watched legal process.
Exactly. And that not guilty plea, combined with the fact that the case is still very much active, still before the courts. That's so critical for understanding everything that happened next in the public sphere. From the moment the news broke, you had the initial shock, obviously. But you also had a lack of immediate, concrete answers from official sources. That creates a kind of vacuum. And what rushed into that vacuum was intense media scrutiny, and perhaps even more powerfully, just waves of public speculation. It felt like everyone, everywhere, suddenly had a theory, an opinion, an explanation, which happens with high-profile cases, sure, but here, with the layers of family tragedy, the bizarre cause of death, the ongoing legal limbo, the speculation around Erin Patterson just intensified massively. You know, the legal system is designed to be methodical, deliberate, evidence-based. It takes time. But public curiosity, especially amplified by modern media, demands instant narratives, immediate conclusions. And that creates this really uncomfortable, potentially damaging tension between due process and public feeling.
Which leads us perfectly into that next phase, doesn't it? How the public, not just in Australia, but really around the world, reacted, interpreted, and yes, theorized about what happened. What really seemed to grab people instantly, what made this story explode, was the sheer rarity and, frankly, the bizarre nature of the poisoning itself. It wasn't just any food poisoning. It was specifically these mushrooms, these death caps. It almost feels like something out of an Agatha Christie novel or some gothic horror story, doesn't it? That specific, improbable deadliness makes it uniquely fascinating.
It really does. And there's a particular reason, almost a primal one, I think, why death cap mushrooms specifically spark such intense fascination. It's their appearance that looks so innocuous. They completely hide their deadly potential. Unlike some poisonous things in nature that have bright warning colors, the death cap often looks perfectly fine, maybe even appealing, especially if you're not an expert mycologist. It can be easily mistaken for common edible types like the paddy straw mushroom popular in Asia, or even some varieties of field mushrooms. This deception, this visual camouflage hiding pure lethality, it taps into a very deep common fear we all have, I think. The fear of hidden dangers lurking in plain sight, in everyday things. When something looks harmless but turns out to be utterly deadly, it creates this kind of grim curiosity, this deep unease that resonates with our own sense of vulnerability. It's the perfect recipe for a compelling, if deeply tragic narrative. Danger wearing an innocent mask right there on your plate. That specific poison adds this almost folkloric, chilling layer to it all.
And because of that built-in intrigue, and because, especially early on, there were no quick, definite answers from the official investigation, the online discussion just split almost immediately. You basically saw two main narratives emerge, often argued quite fiercely. On one side, you had the accidental poisoning theory. People supporting this idea suggested Erin Patterson might have genuinely, unintentionally used death caps. Maybe she mistook them for edible ones she knew, or maybe picked some wild ones without realizing. This perspective frames it all as a terrible, tragic mistake, a devastating accident that nobody could have foreseen. It's still horrific, but it offers a kind of explanation rooted in human error rather than malice. And arguments often pointed to reports that she might have eaten some herself, asking why she'd do that if it was intentional. It tries to find a logical, if heartbreaking, reason.
Right, that theory definitely appeals to our need for explanations that make some kind of, albeit tragic, sense. It lets us imagine a world where awful things happen through mistakes, which is perhaps easier to process than deliberate harm. But the counterargument, the intentional harm theory, well, that gained a lot of traction very quickly too, particularly online. This involved a huge amount of speculation about possible motives, often linking it to reports or rumors of existing family tensions or complicated relationships, things hinted at in early news coverage. Some online commentators focused on what they call the unusual circumstances of the guest list, suggesting maybe certain people were specifically invited, or maybe someone else wasn't there for a reason. That fueled suspicion. For instance, it came out fairly quickly that her estranged husband, Simon Patterson, was apparently invited to lunch, but didn't end up going. That detail alone sparked endless discussion and theorizing among armchair detectives online. But it's so important, as our sources stress, to constantly underline that these are theories. They are speculation, often based on fragments of information, maybe taken out of context, and certainly not proven evidence. They reflect that very human urge to find a cause, maybe assign blame, especially when the official facts are slow to come out and the emotional impact is so huge. The public narrative rushes to fill the gaps.
And that's where it gets both fascinating and, as you flagged, really quite dangerous. Because online, these theories don't just hang there as possibilities. They can harden into conviction incredibly fast. It's like a parallel trial happening in the court of public opinion, running completely separate from the legal system and its rules of evidence.
Precisely. The risk of public opinion solidifying into guilty or innocent before the legal process is complete is enormous. The unknowns in a case like this, the high stakes, the bizarre details, they practically invite speculation. We're naturally wired to try and solve mysteries, connect dots, build a story, even if the dots aren't really connected. But when this plays out on social media, without the safeguards of a courtroom like rules of evidence, the presumption of innocence, cross-examination, it can create a very warped, potentially destructive narrative. This rush to judgment can have real consequences. It could potentially prejudice a future trial by making it hard to find impartial jurors. It might influence how witnesses perceive things. And it definitely inflicts immense personal and reputational harm on the people involved, regardless of what the courts eventually find. It's a stark example of that clash between the justice system's need for slow, careful due process and the public's hunger for immediate answers and drama.
That is a really sobering thought. And this case wasn't just debated online or whispered about locally. The mushroom lunch story just exploded. It became a massive national and international news sensation. It was absolutely everywhere. Major newspapers, TV news, endless threads on social media. It felt inescapable for a while. And I think this points to a broader thing we see sometimes, this undeniable fascination, maybe particularly in places like Australia, but also globally, with crime stories that are rare, bizarre, deeply mysterious. There's something about the sheer strangeness, the almost unbelievable quality of events like these, especially with that human tragedy element that just captivates the public imagination.
This incident became perfect fodder for international media and social media because it ticks so many boxes for a sensational story. Just think about the elements. Seemingly idyllic family meal, quaint rural town setting, deadly poison mushrooms, multiple deaths within a family, eventual murder charges. It's almost tailor-made for dramatic headlines. And then social media acts like this huge amplifier. Its algorithms favor engagement, often meaning the most shocking or speculative bits get pushed hardest. So theories, rumors, even outright misinformation can spread across the globe in hours, reaching millions. And as this stuff circulates, opinions get entrenched, often becoming completely disconnected from the slower factual developments in the actual investigation. It creates a kind of feedback loop. The most sensational aspects get repeated and shared, fueling more frenzy, while the crucial, often complex nuances of the legal case get drowned out by the noise. It really shows how public narratives today are shaped not just by facts, but maybe even more powerfully by the virality of emotionally charged, even if unproven claims. It becomes a sort of collective storytelling exercise, but one with potentially very real consequences.
That's a really powerful insight into how information flows now. So, okay, let's try and distill why this case resonated so deeply. Why did it cut through so much across cultures, sparking such intense focus? It feels like it hits several fundamental human nerves. First, and maybe the most profound, is that sense of betrayed trust. A family meal shared in someone's home, that's supposed to be one of the safest, most secure settings imaginable, right? A basic building block of connection. For that space, that implicit social contract, to turn lethal, it's a massive violation of a core human expectation. It makes you question simple, trusting interactions, even with people you know well.
That's absolutely central. The intimacy of the setting just magnifies the horror. This didn't happen out on the street between strangers. It happened among relatives, inside a home. It's not just a fear. It taps into something deeper, maybe what psychologists call our schema of safety. We build these mental frameworks where home means sanctuary and shared food means trust and care. When those fundamental ideas are shattered so violently, like here, it creates this deep cognitive dissonance. It forces a reevaluation of our most basic assumptions about the world and the people in our inner circle. It's like a primal short circuit, which makes it far more disturbing than, say, random violence. And then you have that deeply unsettling element of food itself being the weapon. Everyday sustenance, something meant to nourish, to comfort, maybe to celebrate, becoming the very instrument of death. That adds this really eerie, almost surreal quality to the whole story. It's deeply chilling because it twists something essential for life into its exact opposite.
It really does. It's a twist that feels almost fictional, like something from a thriller, but it happened. And it pulls on these universal human themes.
Exactly. When you step back, the case really forces you to confront the fragility of life itself, how quickly things can change, how vulnerable we are to hidden dangers. But it also, inevitably, makes us think about the hidden complexities within families. We often project this ideal of harmony onto family life, unconditional love, total support. But reality is often far more complex, sometimes involving unspoken issues, old conflicts, simmering tensions beneath the surface. This case, whatever the final legal truth turns out to be, acts as a stark reminder of those often invisible pressures and dynamics that can exist even in seemingly close families. And finally, there's that deep-seated, almost primal fear, the unexpected turning deadly right in the most familiar places. We fear the unknown, sure, but when the unknown danger enters our home, our family circle sits down at our table. That's a particularly potent kind of terror. This case became a lightning rod for all those anxieties, giving them a terrifyingly concrete form.
And all of this, of course, is playing out against this backdrop of intense media attention and public theorizing focused on Erin Patterson, who, and we have to keep saying this, has pleaded not guilty. Which brings us right back to the dangers of what people call trial by media.
Yes, trial by media. It's where public opinion forms and often hardens into a verdict of guilt or innocence long before the courts have had a chance to determine the facts based on actual evidence presented according to law. Given that this case is still ongoing, as we've said, it's a textbook example. When you talk about due process, we mean the fundamental right to a fair legal hearing. That includes being presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, the right to face accusers, present evidence, have legal help, and be judged by an impartial jury. Trial by media can seriously undermine all of that. It creates this powerful, often emotionally driven public story that prejudges the outcome. It can make finding unbiased jurors incredibly difficult. It might influence witnesses, consciously or unconsciously. It can shape how evidence is perceived even before it's formally presented. In effect, it can deny someone the fair hearing they're entitled to, no matter what the court eventually decides. A person can be convicted in the public mind, regardless of the legal verdict. The personal cost is huge, obviously. But it also raises a bigger question for all of us. Can justice truly be served if public opinion, driven by headlines and social media buzz, has already delivered its judgment before the meticulous legal process has even run its course? It erodes the foundations of a justice system designed to protect everyone, including the potentially innocent.
It's a really powerful and quite disturbing thought, and it definitely applies beyond just this one case. Looking at it more broadly then, what does this whole situation teach us about our collective appetite for true crime? Why are we, as a society, so drawn to these stories? Especially ones like this shocking, bizarre, mysterious, and so deeply human in their tragedy.
Well, this case is a really potent example of that fascination, isn't it? At a basic human level, we seem wired to want answers, to solve puzzles, to understand why people do things, even terrible things. We don't like narrative gaps. We're drawn to stories of good versus evil, to mysteries that challenge our ideas about behavior and norms. When these stories are real, And especially when they involve such strange, specific elements like poisonous mushrooms at a family meal, the pull is immense. It lets us explore the edges of human behavior, grapple with morality, justice, maybe the darker side of things, all from a relatively safe distance. But that fascination also brings a challenge. How sensational reporting, which is very effective at grabbing attention, can sometimes blur the line between reporting facts and pushing speculative narratives. It can shift from just telling us what happened to heavily suggesting who did it and why, long before the courts have established anything concrete. And as we've discussed, that can shape public perception in ways that aren't always accurate or fair. It really encourages all of us as listeners, as consumers of news, to think critically about how we engage with these stories, especially ongoing cases, to consider different angles, question assumptions, and crucially, try to have the patience to let the legal process unfold before rushing to conclusions. That value of impartiality, critical thinking, and just waiting. In the face of such compelling and emotional stories, it really can't be overstated.
It's a potent reminder, isn't it, that our human desire for quick answers is strong, but the path to actual justice is often, and necessarily, much slower and more deliberate. What an incredibly chilling story, and one that leaves us thinking not just about the case itself, but about the power of stories, perception, and how information moves in our world today. Next time on Trending Unpacked, we'll turn from Australian courtroom drama to the polarizing voice shaping political debate in the U.S., Charlie Kirk.